Hello and welcome back to Pull List Priority, the podcast where we give you all of the comic book plot with none of the comic book filler. I'm your host, Adam J. And I think it's safe to say that when I was giving you a breakdown of what I was going to be covering in episode 4, last week in episode 3, I bit off a bit more than I could chew. So what was initially going to be 1 week of Batman and Flash, will now be 2 weeks of Batman and Flash. We're going to be covering a little bit of it today, and a little bit of it next week. It was, I think it was it ended up being like 14 stories altogether. And it was more than I could do, in the time that I gave myself for the podcast this week. So, for this week, we'll be covering some Batman stories and the Flash, Jay Garrick's The Flash origin story. And then next week, we'll cover some of the more detailed stories, some of the stories that aren't just origins. Because we also have another story today that is a villain origin story, and we have a sidekick origin story. So we've got a lot of origin stories today. So that's sort of the theme this week, and then next week we'll take some of these characters and we'll put them in more episodic adventures. So to start things off this week, I'll just give you a brief rundown of what we'll be covering. We'll be covering the Batman story from Detective Comics 36 and the Batman story from Detective Comics number 38. Then we're going to skip to we're going to be covering Batman solo comic, where we meet the Joker and Catwoman. But we're going to skip that for this week. We're going to come back to that next week, and we're going to also meet Jay Garrick's The Flash from Flash Comics number 1. So just 3 stories this week, but they're all pretty good. They're all at least interesting and important for one reason or another. So let's go ahead and start with Detective Comics number 36. This story is called Batman Meets Professor Hugo Strange. And again, if you know anything about Batman comics, you likely know that Hugo Strange is a recurring villain in the modern day. Just like the Ultra Humanite, he has history with Batman, or just like the Ultra Humanite has history with Superman, Hugo Strange has history with Batman and is sort of the first recurring villain that we see in Batman's catalog that isn't the Joker or Catwoman. He is the first one that didn't appear in Batman's solo series and appeared in Detective Comics instead. So, in this story, we begin... Oh, and I'm sorry, it was written by Bill Finger, penciled by Bob Kane and Jerry Robinson, inked by Bob Kane and Sheldon Moldoff. The letters were done by Jerry Robinson, and the editor was Vincent Sullivan. So in this story, we begin with Batman witnessing a man jumping from a speeding car and then getting shot at from inside the car. Batman races down, gets to the victim, and asks who shot him, but all the victim can say is, "Fog, strange fog." So Batman's not really sure what that means. He looks in the guy's coat and finds a notebook, so he takes the notebook out and then leaves. Back at home, Bruce Wayne is thinking about this, and he realizes that the man meant Hugo Strange and Fog. Hugo Strange, by this point in the comics, we've never seen him, but in the story, he was already a well-known villain in the world, in Batman's world, by the time we meet him in this comic. So, Bruce Wayne looks through the notebook and finds a list of buildings and evidence that points to the dead man being an FBI agent. Meanwhile, Doctor Strange is a different character. Hugo Strange's lackeys are reporting back to him, and they tell him that the FBI agent is dead, and that Batman is now onto them and on their trail. So Hugo Strange says, "Okay, I have to accelerate my plan then." So the next night, he releases a thick fog that covers the city, and there's a police officer who even says, "If a crime were to be committed tonight, I wouldn't be able to chase down the criminal because I can't even see where I'm going because this fog is so thick." So, for the next 2 nights, some criminals rob some banks. After the third night, Bruce hears a radio. He's sitting at home and he hears a radio broadcast about an engineer who has gone missing, and he sort of begins to contemplate how the fog, Hugo Strange, and the missing engineer are all connected. Batman breaks up a robbery, so he's able to stop one of the robberies. Doesn't really say how he's able to overcome the fog, and for that matter, it doesn't say how the criminals are able to overcome the fog either, but Batman is able to break up a robbery and apprehend the criminals. Hugo Strange is upset, so he decides to set a trap for Batman. Batman arrives at the trap, and it's just a whole bunch of men attacking him, but of course Batman's able to fight them off, except one of them is able to knock out Batman with a blackjack. Hits him on the back of the head, and he's knocked out. So they take Batman to Hugo Strange, and Strange tortures Batman, but Batman breaks free. He fights Strange, and what I think is interesting is that one of the panels shows, and even explicitly states, that Strange has the upper hand on Batman and is choking him, but Batman sort of tosses him off of him and is able to subdue Strange. Batman finds the missing engineer and saves him. The engineer said that Strange had asked him to make a laser, and Batman reveals that the laser was used to make the fog, and that Strange was behind the crime spree, and finally puts him behind bars. And that's the end of Batman meets Professor Hugo Strange. A very, very basic story, but it was a nice way to introduce this new villain that we're going to be seeing recur. We get that he is he's not necessarily a physical match for Batman, but he's more of a mental match for Batman. So we're seeing more and more of these characters. I think it's interesting that we're seeing more and more of these characters that aren't physical matches for Superman or Batman, but they're matches for them mentally. They're matches for them on an intellectual level. And I think that's interesting, and I think we'll continue to see that for the foreseeable future. Because I can't really think of any popular Golden Age supervillains who were physical matches for Batman or Superman. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Alright, so Detective Comics number 38, Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder. So this was the comic that introduced Robin. It was written by Bill Finger, penciled by Bob Kane, inked and lettered by Jerry Robinson, and the editor was Whitney Ellsworth. So in this comic, we get Robin's origin story. He's a member of the Flying Graysons, and they're being shook down by a crime lord who threatens to kill them, and he does. He messes with the Trapeze Act, and Dick Grayson's parents die in the Trapeze Act. But Batman sort of sees that and recognizes that he's an orphan, recognizes that Dick is an orphan just like he was, so he decides to sort of take Dick under his wing. Batman takes him in and decides to train him. So he trains him in jiu-jitsu, trains him in detection, trains him, we get this sort of montage of Batman training Robin. And then their sort of scheme to get back at Zuko goes into motion. So, uh, Batman and Robin get Dick a job selling newspapers, and some kids sort of like shake him down and threaten to beat him up and take his newspapers unless he pays them. So Robin pays them, and then follows them where they're going. And back at the house where he followed the kids to, he hears Zuko talk about how they're going to shake down more people for even more money. Batman stops Zuko's cronies and sends Zuko a package in the mail with a bat and a note in it. And the note is saying to Zuko, hey, don't even try to go after this building because I'm protecting it. And of course it's a trap, and Zuko and his men Zuko decides to do the job himself. So he gathers up some of his men, and they go to the building. Well, Robin takes out Zuko's crew. Zuko is about to shoot Robin, but Batman saves him. And Batman and Robin apprehend Zuko, and Robin wants to stay on as Batman's sidekick. Because Zuko was I don't remember if it's explicitly stated or just heavily implied that Zuko was the one who caused Dick's parents to die. But at the end of the comic, Batman sort of says, like, hey, you've gotten your retribution, you've gotten your payback, what do you want to do now? And Robin says he wants to stay and continue to help Batman. So that is Detective Comics number 38, Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder. And now we're going to skip to Flash Comics. We're going to Flash Comics number 1 with the origin of the Flash. This was written by Gardner Fox, penciled, inked, and lettered by Harry Lampert, and the editor was Sheldon Mayer. So this comic begins with Jay approaching this girl, Joan, and asking her on a date, and she turns him down. Says part of the reason why she turns him down is because he's a bad football player. So Jay works in the lab, and while he's working in the lab, he's working late one night, he breaks a bottle containing what the comic calls hard water. And it's never explicitly stated what that is, because it's not hard water as we know of hard water today, but it is just some sort of chemical. So the fumes from the hard water knock Jay out, and he's just left laying there, breathing in the fumes of the hard water all night, until he's found the next morning. He's found, like I said, the next morning, and rushed to the hospital, where the comic says that he's between life and death for weeks. But eventually he makes a recovery, and the doctor says that the hard water fumes have made Jay the fastest thing to ever live. So, again, that's all the explanation we get. We don't really get what the hard water is and what that means, but that is that's the best we get. So Jay, while in the hospital, looks out and he just happens to see Joan walking outside. So he rushes to her and tries talking to her, and she says that she was on her way to the library to get a book. Well, Jay rushes off to the library, gets the book for her, and rushes back. He asks to go on a date with her, and she agrees this time, but only if Jay plays in the upcoming football game, because with his speed, they're sure to win. So Jay agrees to play, and yeah, they absolutely kill it. Jay's put in the game. I think they say the score is 35-0 when Jay's put in, and the final score that we get, but the score continues after this, is 65-35, and the implication is that all of those points are scored by Jay. So Jay, at home, Jay reads a newspaper, and reads about some criminals that have been running a racket. So he decides to take them out. As the Flash. He sort of adopts this superhero persona and decides to fight crime and decides to try to do good. Joan goes to Jay and tells him that her dad has been kidnapped. And as she's telling Jay this, a car drives up and tries to shoot Joan, but Jay saves her. He can move so fast that he can grab the bullet out of thin air. So Jay tracks down her dad's kidnappers and saves him and dispatches with the kidnappers. And that is all I had planned for this week's episode of Pull List Priority. We had 2 Batman stories and the origin of Hugo. Well, not the origin of Hugo Strange, but we got Hugo Strange's first comic. We got Robin's origin in his first comic, and Jay Garrick's Flash's first comic. So if you've noticed, we're building up, especially in DC. We'll get back to Marvel. I didn't forget about Namor and the Human Torch, and hope you didn't either. But we're building this group of superheroes in DC, right? We've got Superman, we've got Batman. Last week we met Alan Scott in All American Comics, the Green Lantern. Now we have the Flash, Jay Garrick's Flash. We are getting the early building blocks for the Justice Society of America, which we will get in about 3 or 4 weeks. We'll see the Justice Society form, and we'll get some of those characters teaming up for the first time. But you already can sort of see why they made the Justice Society. You can see the early desire to build this huge base of superheroes. One thing I think will be interesting to see is every different character has had a different writer, right? So just for example, Bill Finger has written pretty much all of the Batman comic book stories. But when we got the Flash origin, that was written by Gardner Fox. And I'll tell you this much, that's not the only origin story that Gardner Fox writes for superhero. And then take Superman, and we've got Jerry Siegel writing most of those stories. So when we do get to JSA, when we do get to Justice Society of America, who is going to have the duty to write those stories? It's something to be thinking about. I actually don't know the answer because I want to learn this as we go. I don't want to look too far ahead. But speaking of looking ahead, looking at next week, we will finally wrap up this Batman and Flash saga. We're going to go back to Batman's solo series, where we do meet Joker and Catwoman. And we're going to go back to Flash Comics, where we meet Hawkman, and we see some of Jay Garrick's early adventures as the Flash. So that's for next week. Shorter episode this week, I know, but I didn't plan for more than just talking about a couple issues this week. So that's all that I've got for you this week. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at Pull Priority Pod. You can find the podcast on Spotify. Just search Pull List Priority. And you can find the podcast on YouTube by searching Pull List Priority on YouTube. So next week, be looking forward to more Batman, more Flash, and the introduction of Hawkman. So until next time, I'm Adam J, and keep reading comics.